Hi there, and welcome to Climate Perspectives, where we interview leading figures in the fight against climate change. My name is Andy Walker, and today we're talking to Shaun Spiers, CEO of Green Alliance, an independent think tank which since 1979 has been working with the most influential leaders in business, NGOs and politics to speed up political action and create transformative policy for a green and prosperous UK. Shaun, thanks for speaking to us today. As I said, Green Alliance is a leading think tank, which, if I might say so myself, is very influential in the climate change arena. And you say on your website that you are keen to accelerate political action and create transformative policy for a green and prosperous UK. Are you making progress in those aims?
Yeah, I think we are. Nobody's making enough progress. This is the problem. But I can look at some of the changes that have taken place over the last few years and say that my organisation's played a big role in that, which is kind of what gets you out of bed in the morning. You know, both in climate change, so things like the zero emissions vehicle mandate, which will be hugely important in taking carbon out of the system. One of the most important bits of policy of the last 10 years. But also in the area of the natural environment, the Environment Act, with sort of world-leading targets to reverse the decline of biodiversity. That again was won partly by a coalition that Green Alliance put together, Green UK, working after Brexit.
I mean, in terms of pulling those coalitions together, because obviously there's a lot of sometimes specific interests of different organisations. How much of a challenge is that? And how do you get people on the same page?
Yeah, I think, I mean, obviously to an extent it's like herding cats. There are lots of environmental organisations. We've all got different aims, different supporter bases, kind of different constraints, raising funds from the same people, same institutions. So there's a bit of rivalry. I would say that in the environment sector, there is better cooperation than in other sectors. The environment sector there are good relationships between the leaders of the main groups, which helps. We got the urgency of a cause. After Brexit, Green UK got together within weeks of the referendum, and other sectors, health, the social sector, etc., didn't really have that sort of strong coalition. So I think we beat ourselves up the whole time. Funders think, why are you duplicating? Is it necessary to have kind of different groups for lots, do we need bats and butterflies and birds and bees and all the different sectoral groups there are? But I think we work pretty well together.
Going into the issue of transport, which I know is something that your organisation is exercised with, it's obviously a key part of what makes a modern society. What progress do you think we're making towards decarbonising transport? And what are the challenges that you see in that area?
I think we're making pretty good progress in technical terms. I think to get the agreement to phase out petrol and diesel vehicles by 2030 was a great success. Very regrettable that the Prime Minister has put that back to 2035. It's quite unclear to me who he's doing that for. Most of the industry wants to go to 2030. We're out of the single market. If you want a UK car industry, let's get ahead of the curve, because electrification is coming, and there's a sort of first mover advantage in being early with it. But even so, the zero emissions vehicle mandate is pretty well unchanged. So there's something slightly performative about the Prime Minister in September saying, I'm going to go slow on all these targets. Actually, the main mechanism for decarbonising cars has remained, the zero, in place. I think the harder task on transport is anything that looks like behaviour change, anything that looks like saying that people should drive less or fly less or get the bus. That politicians are really frightened of.
Yeah, I'm glad you've mentioned behaviour change, because it clearly is something that is so central to a lot of things that we want to change, not just in relation to the environment. There's all kinds of stuff that we could reel off that's not necessarily germane to infrastructure and climate change. But how do we influence people to change their behaviour? And looking at it on a wider scale, how does government, what is the role of government in that process? How can government flex the levers that it has at its disposal to implement what people do?
Yeah, well, obviously, the best way to go about it is to make the alternatives to private transport more attractive. So I think the government's is right to invest in buses and try and make them cheaper, because bus travel is hopeless around where I live. You know, it really is. It's kind of expensive, much more expensive than driving, and much less convenient. But if you get better bus services, as you got in London, I remember my brother living in London during Ken Livingstone's Fairs Fair, got rid of his car because there was no point in him having one. You know, there were so many buses and they were so cheap. So obviously, you make the alternatives better, but that does require a long-term strategy. Does require things like high-speed rail, for instance. You know, when high-speed rail, when HS2 was scrapped, I got back from Conservative conference and read in my local paper that I was going to have road improvements in Kent, funded partly from the savings from HS2. So that's not kind of helping.
What about this? I mean, it's been in the news recently, the initiative in Montpellier in France, where they've instituted free public transport in certain areas. I mean, do you think that's a potential solution going forward?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, everybody's worried about money at the moment. You know,
well, I'll get back to that in a minute.
Yeah. So, but if it's affordable, obviously, it's kind of absolutely ideal, provided there are the bus services to get. You know, you need a combination of price and availability of service. But I think kind of to say this is a national mission, because the other thing, of course, is, you know, I'm a car driver, but I'm also a pedestrian and a public transport user. I don't really want to be stuck in my car all the time. I would like to have some alternatives. I'd like to be able to read while I travel. I'd like to be kind of have somebody else doing the driving. And where I live, and it's you know, I live in one of the Medway towns in Kent, but it's like a lot of places, you just can't expand the roads. There's you know, unless you're going to knock down lots of houses. And so the only alternative really is to get people out of their cars into other forms of transport.
I think that making public transport attractive is obviously, you know, crucial in all of that. And I like your image. I mean, I'm a massive reader and I love reading as well. If I can be on the train or even a bus, I'll even take a bus that takes longer to get somewhere because I can read a book, or even, God forbid, do some work. But is the government doing enough in that area? Notwithstanding where there may well be issues like where you are in terms of physically expanding the system, but if there was more investment put into better public transport, maybe people would come out of the cars.
No, well, governments never do enough, do they? And then he's a kind of odd person from an NGO who says, yes, the government's doing perfectly. But I mean, the government really isn't doing enough. And I think the scrapping of HS2 should be a real kind of wake-up call for the country. If we as a country can't build a new rail line, kind of what are we getting wrong? And the way the decision was made after hundreds, perhaps thousands of hours of parliamentary debate and scrutiny and successive transport secretaries committing to it, kind of almost on a whim, it's scrapped, and they're talking about selling off the land now. So and HS2, of course, was not about just going faster between Glasgow or Manchester and London. It was about connectivity and about improving rail transport all over, particularly the north of England, north of the Midlands. So I'm depressed by that. I think we do need more airlines. We do need high-speed rail in this country of some form. Not that I would defend all the decisions HS2 took, by the way, but
indeed. And I think it's interesting you mentioned HS2. I mean, I can make this statement because I'm a journalist, but it's clear that there's obviously some politics going on here, dare I say it, and money saving. And you said yourself earlier that, you know, money is scarce in a number of areas. Do you think there is a danger? And you referenced the you know, the shift back on the electric vehicle commitment. Is there a danger that the government will backtrack on their commitments in the face of economic challenges, and also as it looks to ready a war chest for a general election that we're told may well happen towards the end of this year?
Yeah, there's certainly a danger. I don't think there's a particular danger on the zero emissions vehicle mandate, because that decision's been taken. And one of the things that you hear time and time again from business is they want consistency of policy. They want to know what the policy is so they can make long-term investment decisions. So I think that's probably safe. But there is a big question now is whether we're going to have a general election where all the main parties are saying the future of this country is to decarbonise, to go with a net zero future. And that is good for the economy as well, because we'll bring investment. It's good for people because we'll have warmer homes, we'll have lots of jobs in new industries rather than kind of trickling out the last jobs in fossil-based industries. Are all parties going to go into the election saying that, or is there going to be a political cleavage with the Conservatives saying we can't afford this, it's a middle-class diversion, it's going to add to inflation, etc., etc.? Because what Labour are proposing with their Green Prosperity Plan looked pretty mainstream 4 or 5 years ago. And all the business are saying that for them to invest, they need some pump priming from the government. Now that looks like it's becoming a political dividing line, and that's a bit depressing, because what we don't want to be doing is moving into a situation of UK climate politics, which looks a bit like American or Australian climate politics, where this is a left-right issue. The Conservatives, to my mind, should be standing on a kind of a proud track record, not something we always criticise them, we always want more, but they were the party who introduced net zero. They've done lots of really good things. There's a big caucus, over 100 Conservative MPs in the Conservative Environment Network. This shouldn't be a party political issue. It's about the future of the country.
Well, absolutely, but it's interesting, isn't it? Because obviously they've lost an MP. They're going to be facing another by-election as a result of their stance on drilling for oil in the North Sea. That came up in the news recently. Let's hope it doesn't become a political dividing line. But it seems to me that there needs to be more vision on these issues, because when you've got the business community, almost unanimous on the way forward, yeah. Surely it's the role of politicians to show some vision in terms of what we need going forward. You mentioned it yourself there about the potential for millions of jobs in the green sector. How do you view the developing political processes, particularly around local mayors, where they're having more and more influence in relation to putting forward policies in this area? Could that be a potential solution?
Yeah, undoubtedly it could. I think quite often when you get depressed with Westminster politics, you go and listen to Andy Street or Andy Burnham or one of the other mayors, and you think, blimey, there is a bit of vision here. There is a sense that you can do things and you can carry people with you. So I think that, the idea that all this can be done from Whitehall or Holyrood or just from centres of power is wrong. We do need to evolve.
So it's interesting you mentioned Burnham there, because he obviously moved away from Westminster when he made that move and said he wanted to make more of a difference in the regions. And I know that, having spoken to him, that climate change is a key part of what drives him. Obviously, you're driven, by this kind of agenda. Can you recall the first, what drives you in this area? Can you recall the first moment when you first became aware of climate change, and what drives you to try and make that difference?
Yeah, you kindly gave me notice of this question, and the honest answer is I can't remember. and I do remember I worked for the Association of British Credit Unions for 5 years, and I remember then we had a travel policy, which I think was quite normal, is of travelling in the way that is most cost effective to the organisation. And when after the Hungerford Hatfield rail disaster, I flew from London to Scotland a lot. I mean, and now I look back at it, thinking, how did I do that so guiltlessly? So I think it's been more of a sort of growing awareness of the issue than a sort of an epiphany, really.
What inspires you about what you do and the people that you work with? And that can be either the people who work beside you, but also the wider stakeholders that Green Alliance is involved with.
Well, I'm inspired by my colleagues because they're also incredibly bright and committed. I mean, Green Alliance as a think tank, we kind of have a steady stream of people with kind of so many good degrees and such sort of expertise and such an eye to detail. But I think what also inspires me is that it's not just academic. It is actually saying what is the way to achieve change. And it's not by producing a report. It's not even necessarily by saying the right thing. It's by saying the right thing at the right time and getting it to the right people and then achieving that change. And that's what inspires me. I think if all we were doing was producing brilliant reports, then you kind of get a bit frustrated about not making an impact. If you produce brilliant reports and manage to sell them into politics in some way, not necessarily quickly. Some of this stuff can take, the point about think tanks isn't that you're trying to deal with next week's news. You're sometimes trying to shape things for sort of 3 or 5 years time. But there's always that sense of what is the change we're trying to achieve, and that's inspiring.
Just on that, and coming to a conclusion, we talked about some of the challenges involved in creating a low carbon transport network. Surely planning is going to be at the heart of that. I mean, you mentioned yourself where there are some challenges in relation to expanding the network, whether it be buses traveling on it or whatever. How do we ensure that a low carbon transport is at the heart of the planning system, and how do we ensure or try and ensure that we can persuade people that it's in their best interest to go down this route, particularly in the light of how this potentially could pan out as we approach a general election?
Yeah, well, it comes back to the point you made about having a vision and a really clear plan. And on climate change, we have got a really clear plan, which is net zero, and we have carbon budgets, and we know we have to make the changes that are going to deliver the carbon cuts that we need. I think planning is a hugely important part of that. And before I came to Green Alliance, I was at the Campaign to Protect Rural England, did years on planning, wrote a book on planning. I mean, planning could be so important to all this, but you need to reboot the planning system. You need to invest in the planning system, and you need to say that we have a national mission, a national challenge to achieve lots of things, social justice as well as cutting carbon, but we need to plan for it positively and engage people in it, rather than think planning is the dreary thing that gets in the way, liberalize it, cut it, stigmatize planners. Like Eric Pickles called them the last outpost of Albanian communism. Keir Starmer keeps talking about bulldozing planning. Planning, we need to plan properly for the nature-rich, zero-carbon future we need. And that I wish I could hear from more politicians.
Just finally, Shaun, how optimistic, notwithstanding all of these challenges and the vagaries of politicians and the general election on the horizon, how optimistic are you about the future in this particular area?
Yeah, one of Green Alliance's values is optimism, so it's compulsory. I have to be optimistic, but I think also if you're dealing with climate change and you realise the huge scale of the challenge, and just look at the weather, just look at the suffering that's happening through just locally on the floods, but also people losing lives abroad on it, it could get you down pretty easily. And but I do cling on to the optimism, because I think that there are enough politicians of all parties who get it, and certainly business is ahead of politics. I think the people are ahead of politics. It's remained a kind of top 3, top 5 issue. So I am optimistic that we can crack this, notwithstanding fears about a Trump presidency or the EU going populist or whatever. I just think we've got to, and if humankind can't sort this one out, then we have to believe it can, and there are enough good signs that it's doing so. It's just about retain my optimism.
That's brilliant, Shaun, and I love that. The fact that optimism is a key value of Green Alliance, and therefore optimism is compulsory. If only we could apply that to all aspects of our lives, then maybe we'd be less stressed, more relaxed, and ultimately more optimistic. Shaun, that's been fantastic. Thanks very much for talking to me today on Climate Perspectives. Thanks to everybody watching and listening online. Don't forget you can follow us on Spotify to get content updates, hear more interviews with change makers, and also listen to our regular thought leadership audio articles. Shaun, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you
for taking part today.